Okay, well, obviously today is draft day, so that's something we are looking at very closely. After this season, it didn't go the way any of us wanted, fans, administration, coaches, players, but we're going to move on and we're going to make things better. The draft obviously will be a big part of that, both with recruits and our current team. So we're watching that very closely, keeping our fingers crossed. From a coaching staff standpoint, we're going to make a couple tweaks that I think will really optimize everybody's talents on our coaching staff. Trip Couch will now be on the road evaluating players. Mike Current will be in our Director of Player Development role to really optimize his talents. And Stuart Lake now will be our full-time hitting coach, with me obviously still heavily involved there. So as we move forward, I think that'll optimize everybody's talents, and I think it'll continue to get this program to be as good as it can possibly be. With that, be happy to answer questions.
Raise your hand and Mike Thiel will start.
Mark, you just mentioned a couple of coaching changes, but when you have a season that went like this with a lot of the injuries taken into account, do you have to look at some of the other things like your coaching strategies, your style, and think about tweaking those too, or is it just it was a bad year for injuries and that was it?
Well, you evaluate everything. You look at everything, the whys, what caused things. You always look for cause and effect, and you're always looking to optimize the program. And so whether it's personnel, whether it's using people properly and with their best talents, you just always evaluate everything. That's after a winning season. That's after a tough season. You always look to make sure that everything is being run at its highest level. And so the decisions we're making are trying to get us there.
Go to the back with Mike.
Yeah, Mark, going off of that, I guess that answers my first question, whether or not it depends on sort of the season, your evaluation process, but what's the first thing that you do in that evaluation process? What does that look like in the off season?
Well, in the evaluation process, the first thing you do as a leader is you look in the mirror and you see what can you do better as a leader? What mistakes did you make? Was it just tough luck? Is it all of the above? So the first thing you do as a leader is you always look in the mirror first and ask yourself, what can you do to help the program, to help the group? And so that's the first thing. Then from there, you always look at the coaches, the makeup of that staff. You look at your players and the personnel. You look at your practice habits. You look at every potential category within your program, and you just try to make sure that it's as good as it can possibly be.
Mark, I know there's a lot to be decided and probably some things you can't talk about, but in general terms, kind of evaluate the class coming in and what kind of impact you think they can make next year?
Yeah, well, obviously if the draft class, stays together, this is a really good class, both in high school high-end players, and the JUCO class I think is the best collection of JUCO players in the country. I don't think that can be even be debated. So a lot of impact players coming in. We have to get them through these next couple days. But when you look at what we're losing compared to what's coming in, I think we can all safely say there's going to be some significant improvement just from a numbers standpoint.
You're back left, Matt.
What goes on for you and the players and the other coaches during the summer as far as like your balance between recharging for the upcoming season and getting ready for the season with recruiting and workouts and everything?
Yeah, the summer for coaches, it's all about being out there recruiting and evaluating future classes, future players. The players are a mix between summer school, working out, and playing summer baseball and summer resting if they're coming off injuries and having to rehab. But coaches stay very, very busy on the recruiting trail, and players are doing what they need to do individually, whether it's classes, whether it's rehab, whether it's playing summer baseball. So it's a mix of everything.
On the back of the Kenzie, then Will.
Hey, Coach. You look at your first year and you look what you were able to do, and despite this year not going exactly as planned, you learned a lot about your guys and the youth of your team. What do you tell them, going into next year, despite, again, only your second year here, it's a process. How do you kind of tell your guys, look at us, we have so much potential?
Yeah, and I think you said exactly right. It is a process. You have to build it brick by brick. You have to continue to recruit well. You have to tweak things within your program that you think are necessary and will help. And you just let them know that this is a program that's been good for a long time, and it will be good for a long time. And this year was a speed bump, obviously, but it doesn't affect how good we're going to be in the future.
Without taking into account things you can't control, like injuries, at what point did you realize that the hill with this season would be as steep as it was?
It's a good question. If I look at a turning point in terms of how the pitching was affected, I think when we took that visit out to the mound at Clemson and Carmen Majinski had to come off the mound with a broken foot, to me that started the dominoes of the pitching staff having to be stretched and pushed a little bit too far. And then obviously there were more after that. But I look back at that as kind of the beginning of what turned into some struggles for us. We're, I think, 14-3 after that Clemson series. We're doing pretty well, and we were holding our own. But by the time we got to the SEC, it was too big a hill to climb based on who we were playing and who we had healthy.
Great.
Yeah, Coach, just going back to the coaching changes, what did you see in each particular coach that made you feel that they fit best in those roles? And then with Stewart, just how important is it to have someone full-time focusing on hitting and something like that?
Yeah, I think this is clearly the best use of all of our guys' talents. Mike Curran has done a really good job on the recruiting trail for us, but with me, he's always been close to me in terms of the inner workings of a program, and he has not been able to do that for the last 2 years, and I think that's where he really helps me the most. He also has a second child on the way, so I think it's a win-win from that standpoint. And he's always been really good in that role for me in terms of just helping with the inner workings of a program. Trip Couch is one of the highest regarded talent evaluators in the country. Has been for a long time, both at the college and the professional level. 9 years as a scout for the Diamondbacks, so I think that puts him in a perfect role for him. And then Stuart Lake has developed a ton of hitters over the years. Here, Ole Miss, a lot of places he's been. And last year with Mike Curran being the hitting coach / recruiting coordinator, he kind of got spread thin. When he was recruiting, he was away from the hitters, and when he was with the hitters, he was away from the recruiting. So this is a much more seamless way to have everybody doing their strengths and making sure nothing is missed. So I'm really excited about these guys maximizing what they can do for this program in these roles.
Mark, can you give us an update on a couple of guys, Graham Lawson and
Yep.
Ridge Chapman? How are they doing, and do you expect those guys back?
Graham is doing really, really well. I think he's ahead of schedule. Feels strong, says his arm has never felt better, so we're really encouraged by his progress and expect him to have a major role for us next year. Rich Chapman is not quite as far along, has had a few more roadblocks along the way, but he's also a guy we're hopeful that can help us next year. And if they can both help us, there's 2 95-mile-an-hour arms that we didn't have this year, so now they can be a big piece of the puzzle.
Mark, I believe there's 4 guys who could have come back who've already announced their intention to transfer. Has there been anybody else besides those first 4?
There may be. I mean, again, our program, but also every program in America are trying to find good fits for both sides. It's got to be a good fit for the player. It's got to be a good fit for the program. The transfer portal, has a ton of guys around the country. Because recruiting has gotten so early, these kids sometimes are committing 3 years ahead of when they even get to college. You're not always going to hit 100% on good fits on both sides. So it's a constant evaluation, and you just try to make sure that what you land on is a good fit for the player and a good fit for the program, and that's a constant ongoing process.
I guess Noah obviously came in as a preseason All-American and probably didn't have the year he wanted. Have you been able to pinpoint, I guess, what exactly went wrong for him, and what are expectations now for Noah heading to the Cape?
Yeah, I think with him, it's just a matter of, it was probably a combination of putting a little bit too much pressure on himself. I think it was he just got into a little bit of funk and had a hard time getting out of it. He also hit a lot of balls hard that were at people. So, the stats show that he probably should have had a little bit better numbers than he did. But I also think he learned some things. I think he learned that the bunt needs to be a big part of his game. And coming off the success he had in the Cape, sometimes it's easy to say, hey, I did great in the Cape Cod League, I'm going to stay status quo. But sometimes, the game will humble you a little bit, and you learn other parts of the game need to be developed as well. And I think he's learned some very important things. The kind of player he needs to be is a guy that really uses that speed, has line drive pop, not trying to hit home runs, use the whole field, and I think he'll have a really good bounce back year. I think he'll have a good summer in the Cape again, and be prepared to have a really good junior year.
You spoke about this a little bit earlier in the year, but how do you dispel or fight off the misconceptions from detractors when it comes to trying to add that third paid assistant coaching job and also the stuff with the scholarship limits and things of that nature? How do you as coaches as a whole try and fight that?
Well, obviously, the coaches within the business are always trying to make the game better, both for just the health of the game in general, but also for the coaches, for the players. And we're always trying to get more scholarships because I think we're underfunded at 11.7. We're always fighting for our coaches because coaches don't deserve to be called volunteers when they're putting in 70-hour weeks. So I think the leadership in the ABCA and then coaches around the country are trying to continue to improve the game at all levels. Scholarship limits, coaching staff, restrictions, those are all things we're always trying to improve.
When you kind of look back, assess, look at kind of the hitting struggles overall this season, did you feel like there were certain common themes, or was a lot of it just a lot of different guys having kind of a lot of different kinds of struggles and all of those just sort of coming together almost? Yeah,
well, obviously we struck out too much. And the second half of the season, those numbers actually went down pretty significantly, but we accumulated a lot early in the season. Obviously, we had good power, but it didn't lead to enough runs because we struck out too much. So, sometimes that's guys trying to do too much. Sometimes that's guys not built to put the ball in play with two strikes. There's a million different reasons. The kind of offense we want is guys that have line drive power, not just swing as hard as you can and hope you hit a home run. And if you strike out, so what? That's the furthest thing from what we want. We want an athletic lineup that provides power, but not at the expense of 12 strikeouts a game. We want balance. We want a left-handed, right-handed balance, and we want to be tough outs. It all has to come together. You have to have the right players, the right coaching, the right approach, the right plan against a certain pitcher. All of that matters. And so the kind of offense we want is an offense that's very tough to pitch to. When you make a mistake, we will drive the ball and often out of the yard, but we'll also fight you with two strikes and a runner on third and two outs. That's what we want to be, and that's what we will be as we continue to move forward and build the kind of offense we want to have.
Mark, what was your conversation with Sawyer like, and what will it be like having him back in the dugout? What are the advantages there?
Yeah, it was a little emotional. I mean, I think for everybody, because we love that kid, and he loves this program. He just couldn't do it anymore, and we kept hoping that he could turn the corner this year, and he kept getting the big opportunities this year to turn that corner, and he just couldn't do it. His shoulder just would not allow it. We kept hoping, and banking on the heart and the guts, and you get to a point now where physically you just can't do it. And so we're thrilled that he's going to continue to be a part of the program. I think it says a lot that he still wants to be a part of this, even though he's not a player. I think that shows how he feels about the program, about the future, and he's going to be a major asset. He'll be a great go-between with players and coaches. He'll be a great spokesman when we have recruits on campus and they want to ask players what it's like. He's going to be a major asset, and I think he'll graduate from here, and I think he'll get that coaching bug, and I think he'll probably coach for the next 40 years.
You mentioned offensively some numbers improving towards the end of the season. What do you kind of attribute that to, and what does Stewart do to kind of help bring about some more of those positive changes going into next year?
Yeah, the biggest thing is Stu will just be able to be in the trenches with those guys every second. Again, as I mentioned, Stu has been the assistant hitting coach, but at times it hasn't been his baby, and so he will have full ownership of that offense. Obviously, I'll still be heavily involved because that's a passion of mine, but I just think him being able to be in the trenches with them for every swing in the cages and every swing on the field, and he's the voice that's leading that group, and will never miss because he's not allowed to by NCAA rules. He's not allowed to be out recruiting and miss games or practices, so he will be there every second, and so I think that's going to be a major part of it. I also think he's an old school guy that will bring an attitude to that group that we're looking for, and I just think he's proven. He's coached a ton of great offenses over the years, and he'll do a really good job.
When you look at the pitching, a lot of younger guys got a lot of opportunities because of the injuries this past year. So moving forward, how do you juggle that, especially with new guys coming in that are going to take on roles,
Yeah.
and players that might have to take on reduced roles?
Well, I mean, it's going to be get what you earn and earn what you get. I mean, there may be guys on next year's team that get less innings than they got this year, and vice versa. It's going to be, how are you developing? How are you evolving? Are you getting better? Are you going forwards or backwards? Combined with the new players coming in. So it's going to be a lot of roles up for grabs, and what happened this year probably will not earn much for next year, because truthfully we don't have a lot of guys that just put up unbelievable numbers this year. So next year is going to be wide open and full of opportunities for a lot of people.
With a guy like Brady, who obviously had a lot put on him early as a freshman, just what did you see out of him, and I guess what's the next step for his game?
Yeah, I think the power numbers were pretty solid for a freshman. The walk totals were pretty solid for a freshman. Now the average and the on-base percentage need to go up, and the strikeouts need to go down. But for the most part, as a freshman, I think he held his own. The average was too low, but for most freshmen, if you look at freshman numbers in this league, it's tough. It's tough. So I think he'll be one of the guys that we can count on moving forward, but he's going to be pushed as well. We've got some players coming in, so it's by no means do you just count on you're going to be a starter every day. You're going to have to work and earn it just like you did this year, but I expect him to continue to evolve into a really good player.
You got hopefully a couple of really good pieces coming back in Eyster and Berryhill. How did you see them progress in development as the season?
Yeah, they were clearly two of our better hitters by the end of the season. Numbers speak to that. Eyster's back for sure. Berryhill, obviously, we're hoping continues to stay in our program. He still has 2 years left, and that really helps his leverage in terms of the draft. They were two of our best hitters and two of the better hitters in the SEC by the end of the season. What they did on the last day at Mississippi State, I think, speaks volumes of what they can do for us. So they're big pieces of the puzzle moving forward.
Where are you with your non-conference schedule besides Clemson? What can you tell us about what you've got lined up?
That's still a work in progress. There's some teams in there that we have on the books. I'm not ready to release that yet, but we're evaluating that as well. We had some non-conference series this past year that I think did a little more damage to us, even though we won the games than you would like. So that's another thing we're going to continue to evaluate. The Clemson series obviously is consistent. The other ones we're still looking at.
Mark, just as a rough number out of the entire draft class, how many guys do you expect to lose to the draft?
Well, hopefully 0. How many do I hope to lose? 0.
Or are comfortable?
How many? Yeah. How many? I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, 2 or 3 maybe. I mean, we've got a couple guys on our team, that are waiting to see if their name's going to be called at the right round, and we have some recruits. So hard to say how many, but we're hopeful that we get them all. Obviously, when you sign them or have them in your program, you want to keep them as much as you can. We're never going to stand in the way. If a guy gets offered $2.5 million, we'll give him the pen to sign. But we want to be a great piece of these players' development, and I think we are.
And also, when's the deadline for them to make up their minds?
July 15th. July 15th.
Coach, back to the coaching side of it. I understand if you can answer this. Do you think we would be seeing Justin Rowe on your staff again next year?
Well, no, he's now a graduate, and so you're not allowed to have a graduate assistant in baseball. So he was an undergraduate student assistant. So he's up in the Cape Cod League. He's going to get more experience up there, and so we are actively looking for a landing spot for him.
And in regards to having Sawyer kind of take the steps that Justin did, how important do you think it is just to have someone that went through undergrad in this program and to have them on your staff, kind of putting in a family aspect of your coaching staff, helping the guys?
Yeah, I love it. I love having players that have been on that field wearing that Gamecock uniform, having big moments, being able to tell the next group, here's what you need to do, or here's when coach says something to you, here's what he means, or here's how you deal with being on the road in front of 10,000 people. Coaches can do that until they're blue in the face, but when you have a player that did it a year ago, it adds weight to it as well. So again, I hope we always have somebody like that, and we're just very fortunate that we had someone the quality of Justin Rowe last year, and now he's passing the baton to somebody the quality of Sawyer Bridges.
Yeah, Coach, there was some news out of the SEC meetings last week, obviously with regards to beer and wine sales. What type of feedback did you get from the fans and alumni and whatever with regards to that party perch setup that you guys had this year?
Yeah, well, they're not going to allow beer or wine in the dugout, so that was the first thing we found out. As it relates to the perch or our fans, I think Coach Tanner and administration will make the ultimate decisions on where it's allowed, and whatever decisions they make, I'll support.
I guess you talked about Graham and Ridge, but just how are Hayden, TJ, and Gilreath doing in their rehab?
Fine. They're all on schedule, and I think by fall ball they'll all be 100%.
Go in the back with Tim. Or Mike first.
Did you and Ray have any conversations, over the last couple months during the season about maybe how to get this thing back on track, or sort of for you personally to just kind of talk to him through this process?
Yeah, he's a resource. Absolutely, he's a resource. And throughout this process, he was a sounding board. We had a productive meeting yesterday, just about his ideas, my ideas, thoughts moving forward. And so, yeah, he's a very good resource and very supportive.